Arkansas is once again in the College World Series after an incredible postseason run through Stillwater and Chapel Hill. With the Razorbacks back on college baseball's biggest stage, it's time to once again go behind enemy lines. I'm Andrew Hutchinson, the managing editor of HawgBeat.com, the Arkansas site and the Rivals Network. The first team in Arkansas's path to its first national title is Stanford. So I'm excited to be joined by Ben Parker, my counterpart over at CardinalSportsReport.com, the Stanford site in the Rivals Network. Ben was kind enough to hop on Zoom and give us a couple of minutes to talk about the Cardinal. We appreciate it, man. How are you?
I'm doing good. How about yourself?
Doing pretty good. Just kind of getting everything in line to make the trek up to Omaha. But let's start off with some kind of the broad picture on Stanford. They were ranked really high in the preseason. I think they were even as high as number 2 at one point. Had a couple of hiccups along the way, but here they are, number 2 seed in the tournament and back in Omaha, where they also were last year. Has this season gone about the way you and other people maybe expected there in Palo Alto?
It's a great question. I think going into the season, there was certainly expectation that they could, get back to Omaha. So I think in that vein, I think the season lived up to expectations, and that was kind of the expectation. But as you said, there were bumps along the way. This is a team that started 1-5 in Pac-12 play. They were ranked outside the top 25 after originally they were, they kind of started the season ranked really high, top 5, top level team early on. Then they actually fell out of the top 25 for a little bit after, starting 1-5 in Pac-12 play. And then, they kind of found their groove again and, went on a 17-game winning streak or whatever it was. And so it's kind of a yes and no to that. In the middle of the season, they were kind of struggling a little bit. I'm not sure people would have seen this coming, but certainly at the beginning of the year when they were ranked as high as they were, I think we're now seeing why they were ranked as high as they were. So it's kind of a yes and no to both. To both, if that makes any kind of sense.
For sure. I mean, the postseason hasn't been easy for Stanford either. I mean, they had to go through the losers bracket and the regional, rallied in that final game to get to the supers, and then in the supers, they of course lost their first game before righting the ship. I mean, was there ever any doubt in your mind that as they were going through the postseason, that they would make it back to the College World Series, or did you kind of just know that this team had the pieces and parts to overcome losses like that?
Yeah, I think I'd be lying to you if I said I knew for sure they were going to get back to Omaha. I mean, just because the big kind of problem for them was both those losses in the regional and super regional came with their ace pitcher Alex Williams on the mound, and so when you lose, I think what we saw, the lesson that they got to learn from this is that we saw that if they lose with him on the mound, their backs are against the wall, and they really got to run the table, and their bats got to really heat up, and they did. The bats were phenomenal. They were, Texas State down 3-1, bottom of the ninth inning, come out with back-to-back home runs to tie it up, and from there pull it out 4-3. I mean, so I think that it's a situation where we knew the bats were there, we knew the hitting was there to get them there, but yeah, I mean, when you lose with your ace on the mound, of course there's going to be questions, of course there's going to be doubts, but I think a better question is, did they still believe they could do it? The answer is they absolutely believe they could. They didn't panic, and that's why they're here.
Let's dive into some of that personnel real quick. I mean, looking at the offense, I mean, it looks like quite the murderer's row. I mean, everybody's almost hitting 300. The team has 117 home runs. So, I mean, is there a weak spot in this lineup, or is everybody pretty much clicking on all cylinders right now?
Yeah, I think in terms of there's not really a weak spot in the lineup. I don't think there's really a weak spot in the lineup. There are guys though who towards the back end, Adam Crampton and Eddie Park aren't as much of power hitters. Although Park was hitting, he was MVP or most outstanding player of the regional because he was just hitting so well in terms of just getting on base, getting contact, and getting hits. But he's not a power hitter. So towards the end of that lineup with Crampton and Park, you don't have as much power there. And there's a bit of a dip in that sense because where they really beat you is they beat you with their home run ball. That's what, as you just read out the stats, right? So that's really where they kill you. And so with Park and Crampton at the plate, there's at least not a huge threat of one of those guys going yard. But what very few teams have 9 power hitters. Anyway, no one has 9 power hitters in their lineup. But to have a couple guys, when your weak spot of your lineup are 2 guys who are so great at getting on contact and getting on base, I'm not really sure there is a weak spot. But there's always a couple guys in there that aren't that to worry about. Okay, if Parks at the plate, bases loaded, 2 outs, you just got to worry about getting him out. You don't have to worry about a home run. So it's that's probably the best way to say it. It's not everyone's a home run threat, but everyone's a threat to get on base, and that's what makes it so tough.
And I mean, looking at the lineup too, I mean, Brock Jones, I think is viewed by a lot of people as a potential first round draft pick. Looking at the stats, I mean, Carter Graham leads the team in homers and RBIs. Are those guys maybe the leaders of that group, or is there another guy that maybe doesn't have quite the same stats as them, but maybe is more of the heart and soul of the team?
Yeah, I think offensively, I think Graham and Jones are certainly your most explosive guys, right? Those are the guys that on paper, on statistically, if you're an opposing team, those are the 2 guys, Graham and Jones, that you're most afraid of. But one guy that has been just absolutely huge for them is Drew Bowser at third base. I mean, he's the guy that hit that. I think he was going to hit the first home run against Texas State in that miraculous comeback, and he's been going yard as well. I mean, to a certain extent, they all have, feels like, almost, but he's been fantastic at third base for them. And then another guy that's really been kind of a heart and soul of the team in a lot of ways is Cody Huff, the catcher. Offensively, he's been fantastic, hitting home runs, getting on base, and then he's just done a really good job of helping to manage the pitching staff, working with the pitchers. He's been excellent as well. So while Graham and Jones are the 2 top power hitters and the guys in the lineup you fear the most, Drew Bowser and Cody Huff are 2 guys that I think deserve some love as well. And then of course Eddie Park for being the most outstanding player of the regional. So there's a lot of guys. But Bowser and Huff are 2 that kind of come to mind as like guys that maybe statistically you wouldn't realize they're quite as good as they actually are. So
Yeah, it sounds like Arkansas is going to have its hands full in that regard. And let's kind of shift gears to the mound now. I mean, you mentioned Alex Williams, the ace. I think he was the Pac-12 Pitcher of the Year. Obviously, really, really good. Last couple outings, though, it doesn't seem like he's been quite, up to the level we're used to seeing out of him. First of all, I mean, do you expect him to be the guy that they pitch on Saturday? And then, secondly, what's kind of been the cause of his struggles? You think what does he need to do to get back on track?
yeah, I think I would expect him to start on Saturday. And we'll see. I mean, it's possible that the manager David Esker decides, look, you got to go a different direction because he's been struggling. But I think they have the mentality of he's the guy that helped get a series and fantastic all season. And he's certainly not going to want to kill his confidence by not pitching him. So I think he's going to bring him out on Saturday. Maybe he won't, but I would expect that he'll be the starter. I think as far as, what's been his problem, it's a game of inches, right? And I think it's one of these cases where he just hasn't quite been dialed in. And the only thing I can think of is just a mental thing. Just mentally, he just hasn't been as dialed in. Or I think maybe not dialed in. Well, yeah, dialed in some respects, because if you're dialed in, you're pitching well. But I think there's like at times, I think maybe he's feeling the pressure a little bit or something where he just feels like he's got it. He knows he's the guy. And I think the pressure's gotten him a little bit. And then also too, it's not like this is the first time this has happened. There was a game against Washington State earlier in the year where he got, shelled, and they were down 6-1 or 7-1 or something. And they came back to win like the 12th inning. But that was, so they, kind of like what they did the first game against UConn, they almost came back to win that one. They actually did do that against Washington State. So there's been some games this year where they've won with him and he's struggled a little bit. So some of this is totally new, and that should give him some hope to bounce back. But yeah, they got to get him. He'll definitely be the guy. But he needs to figure out whatever was working for him earlier in the year. He needs to figure out to bring that back. And if he does that, that'll be a huge boost to him, because as I was saying, if he doesn't pitch well, they lose him on the mound, and that puts him in the 8 ball a little bit. And then what was your second question you asked?
Oh, you covered it right there. That was good. And the guy that I'm also, maybe most intrigued by on the entire roster is Quinn Matthews. This is a guy that Arkansas fans remember back in the Round Rock Classic that started and really limited Arkansas really well. He's a lefty, which has typically given Arkansas troubles. But he went from being a starter to now it seems like he's coming out of the bullpen, kind of a closer role. How did that transition come about, and what do you expect him, his availability being this on Saturday? Because I know he pitched a lot on Sunday and Monday in the Super Regional.
Yeah, so he originally was he originally was a starter. It was him and Williams who's still a starter, and then that third starter role kind of rotated around a little bit. They tried Drew Dowd, but that didn't quite work either. But Matthews is switching from starter to bullpen had nothing to do with he was fine as a starter. The problem was that they just didn't have anybody in that bullpen they could really trust and rely upon, right? And so they realized they could bolster the bullpen some way, somehow. That would be great. And he was kind of the obvious candidate to do that because he's the number 2 pitcher on the team. And so kind of midway through the season, they said, hey, can you at least try this out? And he was like, yeah, and it started working out for him. And then he's kind of been a hybrid of both kind of, sometimes ninth reliever closer, other times, I think what they kind of prefer to do, because I know given his starter experience, he's got the endurance to pitch several innings in a game. What they like to do ideally is put themselves in a position where they have a lead and then bring him in like 7th inning and have him just kind of close it out from there. So if you look at his saves, the majority of his saves, I don't know for sure, but it feels like the majority of his saves are saves of the category where he pitches the final 3 innings of the game, and that gets him the save. It's worked out great for him, and for them, it kind of comes down to really comes down to the situation of the game. I think ideally. Yeah, I don't know. It's just going to come down to the nature of the game. I think at this point of the season, if they're up going to the 8th inning or something, yeah, we'll probably see them. I mean, it's that time of year. And one of the things that they really do emphasize, they want to make sure they use it. That's something they're really conscientious about. They don't want to not use it. So it's like we know we got to use them. So that's why we saw them on Saturday against UConn. They were up 7-1, whatever it was, 8-1, but they were like, okay, we got to use them. So we'll definitely see him this weekend, or we'll see him in the College World Series for sure. But when that's going to be, we don't know. But yeah, I mean, I think Saturday he's got more than a week off. He'll be ready to go if needed.
And I mean, you mentioned that they needed somebody to bolster that bullpen. So I mean, who maybe are some of the other guys? One or two guys that other guys that could come out of the bullpen, and as I mentioned earlier, Arkansas really struggles against lefties. So are there some key lefties that Arkansas should be aware of as well?
Oh man, I'm trying to think of lefties. I can't remember everyone's right or lefty. What I can tell you though, no, that's a great question. My homework isn't quite that good. Yeah, Quinn's a lefty, that I know. I'll say that. Let me answer this question this way: in terms of guys in the bullpen who could come out that could give them some scare. Brant Pancher's a guy they've gone to who's been really good and has been key for them at times. Ryan Bruno is another guy that they've gone to that has been really key for them as well. So those are kind of 2 guys who have come out of the bullpen and done a great job. Another guy who's pitched well for them, he's kind of more like a midweek starter role, is Ty Uber. He's been really good. And then kind of the wild card, I think, is Braden Montgomery. He really brings the heat. And they experimented. I think they were hoping he would be their closer, but he's been a little too erratic, a little too up and down. But he can really bring the heat. And if he's dialed in, he is really tough to get hits against. Yeah, so those are kind of the names that come to mind. And then Joey Dixon, he struggled in that final game there against UConn, but he's had moments where he's been good. I mean, so I think I kind of answer your question. I think it's a situation where it's like, Alex Williams is your starter righty. He's going to come in, and if he plays well, fantastic. He's been rough last couple outings, but he's their ace on the mound starter. And then Quinn Matthews as a lefty is the main closer, the main anchor of that bullpen. And then everybody else is kind of like you don't know what you're going to get, who you're going to get. And sometimes you're going to get something great from somebody. Other times you're not. I mean, Tommy O'Rourke at times has pitched well for them. Nathan Flasley, who for a majority of the season was not very good and was kind of a scary guy to put on the mound, He's had some moments where he's actually been okay. So it's kind of a committee effort, and a lot of it comes down to feel and just who's feeling it and who's not feeling it. So yeah, I mean, I got to look back and see who's a lefty, who's a righty there of all those guys. But yeah, but the names that come to mind are definitely Bruno and Panzer. Those are two guys that have been, I think, for the most part, pretty solid for him.
Gotcha. And the last thing I got for you, I know back on February 27th, these two teams played in Round Rock, Texas. Stanford came away, I believe, a 5-0 win in that game. Arkansas was really struggling at the time offensively. I don't know how much stock we can put into that, but I'm curious how you maybe see this Saturday's game playing out. You don't have to necessarily give a prediction, but how do you see this game playing out, kind of stylistically? And do you think it's a close game, pitcher's duel? What do you see happening?
I think it's gonna be. I would expect it to be a close game. I think it's hard to predict any kind of runaway game in the College World Series. Everyone's here for a reason. Everyone's gotten through a regional, super regional, right? So I expect a close game. I would say this: it comes down to, I think for Stanford, it comes down to the performance of Alex Williams, and if he is a go, can he come? Can he dial it back in and play well again? If he starts and he plays well, I think we could see maybe a pitcher's duel kind of game, maybe a lower scoring game. And I think Stanford's got good odds if that happens. If he struggles and he's not on his game, we could see a situation where, maybe Stanford's going to have to put up more runs to beat him. The other interesting thing will be, of course, to see, is how, if he does start, how much of a leash Stanford gives him, because he's had two bad starts in a row. And if it gets kind of shaky early on, you might just say, okay, give him the tap and you're done. I mean, so we're going to see. I mean, it's tough. I mean, I will say this: that Stanford's bats have been extremely hot as of late, so it's kind of hard to see them not putting up a good chunk of runs. You know, but I think a lot of this comes down to Alex Williams and if he plays, how well does he play? I do expect him to play, but if he does play, how well is he going to play? And that's going to dictate a lot of this. So, but yeah, I will say this: that I would certainly expect Stanford to at least get a few runs, just because their offense has been so explosive this year. So we'll see. I think it's gonna be a close game. I do think it helps. I think it's gonna help. I think it helps both teams. They've seen each other. It's been a while, but I think it's going to help Arkansas, who have saying we've seen that Stanford lineup before. And then vice versa. So I think it's always interesting when teams kind of rematch in situations like this where they've seen each other. But obviously, I'm sure Arkansas has changed a lot, just like Stanford's changed a lot. So in a lot of ways, I'm not sure how much stock you can really put in what happened back in February.
Yeah, for sure. It definitely seems like they're two different teams at this point of the year, and I'm expecting a really fun game. But that's all I got for you, Ben. Thanks again for giving us some time and expert insight, ahead of this matchup in Omaha. I hope all of the Arkansas fans, Stanford fans, and the fans of the other six teams have safe travels to Omaha and enjoy some baseball this weekend. Appreciate it, Ben.